I'm Naomi. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a walker around the room person, so I'll be walking. I teach in the Theology and Religious Studies department as an adjunct professor. And my day job is as the director of faith-based and interfaith affairs in the mayor's office for the city of Philadelphia. So I am tiptoeing back and forth between the church, the academy, and the government, which we can talk about that later. But it's actually not far from this subject matter. My life and how I got here is a story of discovering myself in the Bible. Not necessarily because there are people who phenotypically look like me in the Bible, but because the Bible testifies to my life experiences. That's what I'm calling the Bible in Black. So for the next bit of time, I want to explore, first of all, why this might be a controversial claim that the Bible can be read in Black. And let's look at some scripture from the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, and read with a lens of Blackness. Now, I want to say, if you are not Black, you too can enter the text from a particular vantage point, from a particular testimony, right? And that's what I'm inviting you to do. Not so you can become Black, but so that you can make the Bible and its truths more accessible to more people. And you might be a more compassionate reader, a more gracious reader of the text. So that's I put all my cards on the table, okay? How many of you, we're not gonna go around and kind of introduce, but I'm curious about how you're in relationship to the university community. Students, undergrad, grad, part-time, full-time, okay. Staff members, staff, yeah. Faculty, okay, sort of kind of teach on the side kind of thing. I know that well, yes. Okay, so good. We got a nice mix of folks. This is part one, I want to say that before I forget. Part two, next week, we're going to be looking at New Testament scriptures, okay? Because I figured an hour wouldn't be enough time to do all the things, okay? I want to say hello to people who are going to be watching this recording after the fact. We hope that next week we may be able to live stream this for people who want to participate or at least watch in real time and not after the fact, okay? So the Bible in Black. Whoops. I, every year, consider whether or not I want to change my wardrobe to be an all-Black wardrobe, be one of those people who wear the same color all the time. Because Black goes with everything. Yeah? It's flattering. You can add some texture to it if you want, right? It's good in summer and good in winter. You can wool in Black, right? You can, what do you call you can silk in Black, right? I want to know why it seems to be such a controversial thing to think about reading the Bible from a particular vantage point, not just from a particular vantage point, but from a particular racialized vantage point. Talk to me. Why do you think, or have you ever been in a situation where somebody responded to such with frustration, opposition, anger, confusion? Talk to me. How have you experienced the Bible in Black in the world? Mm-hmm.
Resistance can come because it threatens perhaps my basic theological imagination.
Okay.
The one with whom I've been in relationship
Mm-hmm.
before I knew I was white, that being was white.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize it. And
Okay.
to be invited or suggested otherwise feels foundationally shaky.
Okay. So 2 things I want to pull out from what you said. This idea that there is a normative way of reading the Bible. Subconsciously, I mean, we may not even realize that we've been taught to approach the Bible from a perspective that has been called normative. Understood as white, cisgender, heterosexual male view. So the conclusions I draw from reading this verse have to work for me, the white, cisgender, heterosexual man. And then the other thing you said, something about theological imagination. I want to put a pin there. That the Bible requires the use of imagination. Now, I know I grew up in a religious community where they said the Bible is clear. I just read a tweet the other day. A woman was saying, I'm so glad that in this pandemic, I have not had to suffer from decision fatigue. Because the Bible tells me what I need to do at all times. I don't have to worry. I'm not agonizing about to mask or not to mask, to dine indoors or not dine indoors. The Bible is clear. The Bible is not only clear, but it is prescriptive. It's my roadmap. What do we say? The Bible. Yes, that's the book for me. What were the words? We had all of these songs, right, about the clarity of the Bible and its ability to roadmap us wherever we want to go in life. Basic instructions for something. B-I-B, whatever it was, right? So this requires us to push out of the center perspectives that have been glued to the center for centuries, and requires us to take imaginative leaps that feel icky, or at least new, breaking in a new parachute. What else have you heard, experienced when it comes to reading the Bible from a particular racialized social location? Anything else? Yeah.
A friend of mine, 51-year-old, white, hetero, male, cisgender person who's just started the diaconate process in the Episcopalian Church. And first of all, as a guy, it's funny, he said, have you heard this idea of hermeneutics? And I said, no, never heard of hermeneutics. But the first exercise they were given was hermeneutics of how they interpret the Bible, and they were given readings from female and womanist theology, theology, liberation theology, and he was like actually angry about why they're making such a big deal. Why can't there just be one way to read the Bible? And I was trying to walk with him and just sort of, let's just check in every month or so and see how you're doing. And his temperature's now down.
Okay.
Now that he's dove into some of these other texts, and I really applaud his bishop for sort of foregrounding that lens in their 4 or 5 year program.
So, to be fair, there's some anxiety associated with this. We live in a world that is purports to be very cut and dry. This or that. We don't leave a lot of room for ambiguity, for messiness. Guess what? The Bible ain't nothing if not messy. Every part of the Bible was written within the context of occupation. Either we're talking about the Babylonians or we're talking about the Romans. What does it mean then to birth a text within a sacred tradition and you're living in occupation? just that fact alone means that we hear the voices a little differently. Maybe we even draw a different conclusion. But that's an anxiety-producing thing. It's what I tell my students. It's like you're playing, I keep touching the mic, I'm sorry. It's like you're playing a game of Jenga, right? And I'm asking you to remove the block that is holding up the whole structure. Remember that game Jenga when you pull the brick? Right? You're going to lose the game. That's what's at stake. So it's important that even as I say, black goes with everything, and we should figure out ways to enter the text at different points of access. There's lots of anxiety associated with this. Even for black folk who are living in a world where the center is otherwise. What's normative is otherwise. The demand is to conform to the center for everybody. Okay. So I think that by naming some of the reservations and anxieties, we pull the teeth from them. Right? We say, oh, this may require me to imagine differently. I don't know where we're going, but I'm going to go. And I'm not by myself, right? You're with us. We are not blank slates. So not only is the Bible messy, developed in the context of occupation, we don't even know, we can't even assign an author to some of these texts. I mean, we think we know, but we kind of. We are not blank slates. So the Bible is fraught and complicated and the most unclear thing ever for some. And we are complicated. We don't come to the Bible reading as blank slates. We come to the Bible having had some life experience, having read other texts, hearing those sermons that continue to play in the back of our minds about those texts. And just let me step out of the individual for a moment. We don't come to the Bible empty-handed. We come with a politics, with an ethical framework, with trauma, with grief. This is part of the not blank slate that American Christianity in particular carries with it. Just in case we think it was just all those years ago, I couldn't believe when I found this, but every presentation I do, I find a way to put this slide in because it's just important to know, yeah, this was going on. So, we come to the Bible with our own baggage, and the Bible has its own baggage. It's been scrutinized, books taken out, books put in. The Bible has baggage. Thoughts, questions before we go? Anybody? Okay. So let's look at some texts. I tried to pick texts that we will all be familiar with. Some of them we might not be, though, and I'm happy to help give some context. But I don't want to give too much context because I want you to ask perhaps new questions of the text. Who's talking? Who's listening? What's at stake if I draw the conclusion I've always drawn about this text? If I don't? This is from Genesis. I'll read quickly for sake of time. The Lord says to Abram, Your offspring are going to be aliens in a land that isn't theirs. Your offspring are going to be slaves there. They're going to be oppressed for 400 years, but I'm going to bring judgment on the nation that they serve. And afterward, they shall come out with great possessions. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram. To your descendants, I'm going to give this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. The land of all of these folk, the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Cadmonites, the Canaanites, the Jebusites. Oops. Now, let's dive into the text, perhaps standing in a different place than we normally stand. Normally, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, we read this text as if we're Abram. Ah, good, God's going to give us, God has promised us the promised land, right? After all we've been through, don't we deserve it? Isn't this a gift? Yeah? But what if we drop down into the text like we drop a pin on a map? As if we're the Canaanites. Talk to me about how you hear this text if you're a member of the Canaanite community. What's going on with you? Just pretend. God says to Abram, y'all are going to have a period of oppression, not just a drop in the bucket, but hundreds of years of oppression. Yeah? After that, I'm going to bring judgment on the nation that enslaved you. And I'm going to give you, I promise, that I will give you the land of the Canaanites. What do you think? Talk to me. Uh-oh.
My land.
Okay. You'd minding your business. And somebody comes and takes the keys to your house and says, oh, God promised this to me. I've been through so much. I deserve this. This is my promised land. What else? Anybody else?
Where are we supposed to live?
Okay. Okay. Sort of, it's between the lines there, what happened to all these people, right? They weren't suddenly roommates with the Hebrew children. We aren't talking about blended families. Okay. Do you give it up without a fight? I mean, think, you're a human being. These are human beings. Somebody comes to your porch and says, hi, I know you've been living here. You got the deed to the house. I know. You got to go. You just say, all right, God's will be done. What happens? There's probably a fight. And with violence comes what? Trauma? Yeah? Broken families? Death? So I'm standing here reading this text as a descendant of ancestors who were forcibly removed. This is not going to cooperate with me. Forcibly removed. I was trying to be slick. Forcibly removed from their homes. Told it was God's will. I'm shouting, I'm sorry. Told it was God's will. God's plan. Now, I want to complicate things a bit more and say, you know, I don't think that people are all good and all bad. I mean, they had experienced enslavement for 400 years. That's part of their lineage and their history. And it's pithy, it's more complicated than this, but hurt people do hurt people. It's a pithy saying, but it's true. So we got folk who themselves have been traumatized, who themselves have been dehumanized. Taking land seemingly at God's direction. I have some questions for God if I'm a Canaanite. This how you work? You blessed by cursing? So part of the theological imagination is not only dropping down into the text in a different location, but also being courageous enough to ask God the hard questions. I'm trying to understand your methodology, God. For us to win, must someone else fail? Is that the way this works? So now I'm past the superficial relationship with God. I'm over into intimacy where we can say the hard things. And it's going to be all right. We can have hard conversations and still stay together. But I got to ask you these hard questions, right? Any other things you see in this text if we're going to read it in black? Uh-huh.
They won't say it. It's like being a black folk too.
Yeah. Okay. So, interestingly, perhaps this can be a cautionary tale as well. Be careful not to become the monster you despise. Be careful what you pray for. Okay, let's look at another text. Y'all quiet. Huh? Clearly, I'm used to hollering and screaming. I mean, this lens helps me preach differently. I'm not railing on in jubilation. Even as I respect this story and what the Exodus story means for black folk. That's what I mean when I say it's messy and complicated. It's never been either or, right? This Exodus story, we got Go Down Moses, right, is central, key to black folk finding liberation in this text that was used, right, at a Klan rally to mobilize the folk. And at the same time, it contains a kind of genocide. You're a Canaanite. God is your conqueror. You are the conquered. Okay. You all know this story. King of Egypt says to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, listen, when you go and do your midwife thing and you're birthing children of Hebrew women, if it's a boy, in that child's life. If it's a girl, let the child live. Stop, pause. Usually we just hurry up, hasten our way to the end, right? Because we know that the happy ending is coming. But let's pause. This is an order from the state, from the government, from the powers that be, to value some lives less than other lives. And we're not even talking about degrees of value. We're talking about who should live and who should die. And to do the dirty work of empire, of state, of the government, you got these two women whose call it is, whose vocation it is to bring forth life. What do you do when authorities order you to do something that so violates your own sense of calling, your own sense of spiritual authority, which we get to. They in relationship with God. They know. Verse 17, but the midwives feared God. That's the sermon. But the midwives feared God. And so they didn't do what the king told them to do. They let those boys live. The king summons them, you can imagine, right, with your sanctified eye. Hear it, see it. King calls them and says, what? Expletive, 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 right? Redacted, redacted, redacted. What are you doing? And the midwives say to Pharaoh, see, what happens is the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. You know, they just give birth too quickly, and before we know it, they lying to the state, y'all. Lying to Pharaoh. Why? So that the boys could live. I'm thinking about that mother, right? That black mother who lied about her address so that her child could live with the child's grandparents and go to the school in the grandparents' suburban district. About the woman who got arrested, the mother who got arrested. Because she left her baby at the playground, not baby, child, playground age child, across the street from the McDonald's, so that she could go into the McDonald's and conduct a job interview, do a job interview. Somebody calls the police. She gets arrested. I'm thinking about rule breaking, criminality. I'm thinking about governments that give tacit orders like this. Let them pass. And the courageous ones who stand up to the state and make up a story that'll be believed so that the babies can live. What are your thoughts? Shipra Hua. They need to be venerated. Go ahead. I don't care what Pharaoh said. This is what we're not going to do. They said.
I also see their knowledge of the state and how the state works and what the state is far from, and that the community here wouldn't know anything about childbirth.
Right, right. You know how the uterus, expands. I mean, that can be plucked from 2022 headlines. I'm going to take advantage of the state's ignorance, the state's disregard for how this actually goes, so the babies can live. That's black. We're going to do whatever we need to do to make sure that our babies can live. At great risk to us. But this is our call. Okay, let's look at another one. Okay, I don't know what. Is it blurry? Okay. What? Okay. Moving along here. 2 Samuel. This is a lesser known text, so I'll read it. There was a famine in the days of David, King David, for 3 years, year after year. I'm sorry. And David inquired of the Lord, prayed, what is going on, God, right? The Lord said, well, there is blood guilt on Saul and on his house because he put the Gibeonites to death. So God, there's this conversation. David goes to God and says, what's up? My people are dying. There's a famine. The land won't yield any food. And the Lord said, well, Saul killed the Gibeonites. And so, you know, the land is not going to yield. Let me just parenthetically say here, what are some ecological commentaries we could, yeah, anyway. Verse 2, so the king called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Imagine David on the phone. Talking to the Gibeonites. Now the Gibeonites were out of the people of Israel, yada, yada. Saul had tried to wipe them out in his zeal for the people of Israel and Judah. So Saul's doing. David said to the Gibeonites, what can I do for you? How can I make this up to you? How shall I make expiation that you may bless the heritage of the Lord? David, the diplomat. David, the negotiator. Right? The Gibeonites say, listen, you can't pay us. It's not a matter of silver or gold between us and Saul and his house. Neither is it for us to put anyone to death in Israel. We also don't live and die by the sword like y'all do. They said to the king, the man who consumed, he said, what do you say that I should do for you? That's David. And they said back, the man who consumed us and planned to destroy us so that we should have no place in all the territory of Israel. Let 7 of his sons be handed over to us, and we will impale them before the Lord at Gibeon on the mountain of the Lord. David says, okay. Okay, so, you know, this is kind of shady dealings, all right? Deal-making David. You know, noble in intent, trying to get this famine to break, but enters into this negotiation process with the Gibeonites who say, we want 7 of Saul's sons. Saul did this to us. We're going to take 7 of his descendants. Verse 7. The king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Saul's son, Jonathan, because the oath that was between, you know, David and Jonathan had a BFF thing going on. And so the king is like, all right, I'm going to leave Jonathan's line alone. But he did take 7 sons. 2 of the sons were Rizpah's. See this name, Rizpah? Daughter of Aiah, whom she bore to Saul. So Rizpah was one of Saul's women. Had children with Saul. 2 sons, Armani and Mephibosheth. And the 5 sons of Merab, daughter of Saul. He gave them, verse 9, into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they impaled them on the mountain before the Lord, and the 7 of them perished together. They were put to death in the first days of harvest at the beginning of barley harvest. So stop. Rizpah, did you know about Rizpah? Rizpah's name does not appear anywhere but in these couple of verses. But Rizpah's a mother. She was already vulnerable. You know, she wasn't, I was going to say, she was Saul's, you know, one of Saul's playthings. She has these children, and in a political deal gone bad, her sons end up being killed. And then they're impaled on a mountain, right? Talk about humiliation. Verse 10. Then Rizpah takes sackcloth, spreads it on a rock. This is lamentation. This is grief. This is mourning, right? From the beginning of harvest until rain fell on them from the heavens. In other words, a long time. She did not allow the birds of the air to come on the bodies by day, nor the wild animals by night. Picture this one mother in her mourning clothes, in her funeral garments, beating back the birds and the animals who have come to feast on these decomposing bodies. On the side of a mountain. She's considered a nobody to David and to the state. But these were her babies. And she's protecting not only her sons, but other mothers' sons who are casualties of this deal that David has made. David was told what Rizpah had done. And so David went, verse 12, and took the bones of Saul, the bones of Jonathan, brought up the bones to that place on the mountain, and buried all of them together. So part of the indignity was they were killed in this deal, and then the mama couldn't even bury them. And so David hears about what Rizpah is doing. Now picture it. David is king, has just done this thing to try to make life better for his people, right? And you got this woman who's standing there crying and sniveling, and what must David have felt? Or, different question, how would this have looked to people? Fans of David. Would David have been happy about this? Annoyed? What? What do you think? Y'all with me? David's authority in some way was subverted by this woman who had the nerve to mourn this loss publicly. She keeps vigil with the bodies. Think about Michael Brown, who laid in the street for 4 hours in the sun, in an August Missouri sun, uncovered. I'm thinking about the mothers of the movement. Have y'all been watching this mini-series? Tune in to this. I forget what channel it's on, but ABC. You can get it on Hulu if you miss it live. It's called Mothers of the Movement, about Emmett Till's mother, who insisted, right? Leave that casket open. Let them see what they did to my brother. And it was an embarrassment to the authority. I mean, the movie does a good job. The sheriff was like, who does she think she is? At great risk to herself, she decides to dignify these boys with her presence, with her tears. They were somebody's children, not pawns in a political game. What do you think about this story and our read of it in Black? Mm-hmm.
In some ways, I'm also inclined to think that David, my first thought before the comments that you just shared was even that David could have been different because he went so far as to not even looking at these sons as human.
Sure.
Um, and so maybe it wouldn't have even crossed David's mind, the mothers of these sons, and how they would want to grieve over their sons, because David, to begin with, just looked at them as part of this political deal. So it's interesting to hear too that in some ways he might have felt he was being undermined. It just shows how selfish he was in that situation.
The lack of political creativity. I mean, I'm talking about David, but I could be talking about 2022. Isn't there another way? We got to send the drone and drop the thing over the thing. Isn't there another way? Especially when the Gibeonites at first were like, no, enough blood has been shed. And so I'm wondering, what's between those lines? How did they go from that to, well, give us seven of Saul's sons? What didn't get written down? I feel like I'm hearing bits and pieces of the conversation. Why couldn't David be more creative? Why couldn't David be more humane in his political strategizing? Wasn't there another way? Verse 14. After David buries the bone, right? Last verse. Don't miss it. After that, God heeded supplications for the bone. Interesting, the timing of this. That the land didn't open back up after the boys had been dead. The deal was made. The deal was done. The boys were dead. The famine persisted. I just think that's interesting. It was Rizpah's witness that brought David down from the palace to the place. You're going to have to look at these bodies, and you're going to have to dignify them by burying them at least. And after that, the land healed. I just think that's interesting. David is usually the hero of the story. Even when he's messing up, we say, well, David, But this woman, whose name only gets called a couple of times, and you'll miss it if you're reading too fast, this woman catalyzed the healing of the land. Mothers of the movement. Y'all all right? So let's process a bit. We got just about 10 more minutes left. Really 8, because I want you to be able to leave right at 1. What kinds of questions are important to ask if we want to approach the text with Black in mind? Again, this is not so that we can become Black but so that we can perhaps see the underside of the text. See what's between the lines. Place people at the center who were just meant to be plot devices. So what are some of the kinds of questions? Who's speaking? Who's not speaking? But who had to be in the room? This is not the New Testament, but one of the texts I love asking that question about is the text in John where the folk caught the woman, caught her in an act of adultery. by herself, apparently.
Right.
Who's not there? Who's not speaking? Why have I been told to draw the conclusion I naturally draw from this text? To see David as good, the hero, courageous, all the things, despite what he's actually doing. What's been redacted or what's missing? What didn't get written down but had to be part of the story, right? That conversation David's having with the Gibeonites, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that way, unless who's hurt in this text? Who's hurt? What is God doing? Is God present? How so? Do we know what God is doing because somebody's telling us what God is doing? What's that person's social location? What's going on with them? Who seems to be caring for the people, the community, the babies, at great risk to themselves? Who's paying the cost? How are people making ways out of no way? I'm thinking back to Shipra and Puah. How are people subverting the established order, the status quo, making themselves enemies of the state in order to preserve life? How is it complicated? How are people complicated? How are people messy? How is it both and not either or? David, a man after God's own heart, and David, deal maker. David, rapist. We didn't go there today, but was consent possible? That's the only question I have. So, my preaching professor, when I was in grad school, told us to prepare for preaching by reading a text and then writing down, taking like a piece of legal pad size paper, and writing down all the questions that come to you. No question is silly. And you know what that does? It put us in a position of humility and curiosity. I don't know what the text is saying. I have questions. Is there good news here? And good news for whom? These are questions that I think help us enter the text differently, in a different posture, and read the Bible in black. What's the good news for Rizpah? What's the good news for the other mothers? Shipra and Puah knew God too, when perhaps they would have been considered godless or, not the spiritual authorities. But the text says, but Shipra and Puah knew God. Who do we assume knows God? And who do we put in the category of, well, they're not the godly person in my imagination? Okay. We got about 5 minutes left. And I want to hear from you what you're thinking about. I ask my students before we leave, it's like their exit ticket. What are you chewing on? What are you going to be thinking about as you walk back to your dorm? What are you chewing on? Is there discomfort or anxiety? Or is there relief? Is there curiosity? Is there, what's going on? Mm-hmm.
For me, it's relief.
Mm.
When I saw the topic, I was curious.
Mm-hmm.
I see everything in black. I'm a black female, so I didn't understand what that meant
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So there's relief
Mm.
for me to see that I'm not lost in it.
Mm.
Reading passages like this, they speak to everyone I know, so this isn't foreign to me.
Mhm.
When I read this, this book reminds me of so many women I know.
Yeah.
So it's not like this is foreign
Mhm.
for me.
Mhm.
It's interesting to hear other perspectives.
Mhm.
But my husband's a person who always tells me that I'm a person who believes things because I'm an AME and I'm a proud AME,
Uh-huh.
right? So if you understand what that means,
Mhm.
all of my pictures were black.
Mhm.
Share good father, they're,
Mhm.
they're all black. So all of my images were
Sure.
black. My Santas were black.
Sure.
Those were not out of order things for me. So it's been different coming here.
Mhm.
And my husband's had to say when I first came, like, you have to be respectful. Like, they don't see what you see. They don't know what you. I was like, don't we all see Christ, but we just see. And he was just sort of like, just please don't do that.
Okay. Okay. Uh-huh.
Just please do
I ain't say nothing.
right. Just please do you.
Uh-huh.
Don't do that. Like,
Sure.
accept. And I was like, but we all love Christ. It doesn't matter what you said to our imagination. So I love the same Christ that Father Kevin loves.
Mhm.
Who cares what it looks like? Right?
Mhm.
It's the same thing we feel in our hearts. Same thing we do. This stuff is when I read the Bible, it speaks in volumes to me from my lens.
Mhm.
And a lot of it is real. It's just if you look at it in current context.
Mhm.
And so I try to refresh just coming here made me say I want to read the whole Bible all over.
Mhm.
Because it's bringing up more stuff for me.
Mhm.
And I said now it's a relevant time. So
Mhm.
this is very relevant
Mhm.
for me, and I appreciate it. Because I was confused. I didn't know what I was
Mhm.
doing.
Mhm. Mhm.
I appreciate everyone's perspective
Mhm.
and what they're feeling and what they're seeing in their own lives.
I so appreciate you saying this notion of relevance, right? That this kind of shift, I think, is necessary. So these texts continue to speak. God is still speaking. And if we don't see this as the state trying to repent of its past sins by shedding more blood, and innocent folk becoming the casualty of that process, the state seeking its own redemption, and then we got the earth withholding her generosity. (2022). I think I got one more story, y'all. I'm sorry. Quickly, you know this. God tested Abraham. You know where I'm going. Abraham, take your boy, your son, go to Mount Moriah, offer him in sacrifice. Verse 3. So Abraham got up and went to do. Wait a minute. Now, what parent is not going to want to have a longer conversation? What's not there? Did Abraham protest? Did he go tell Sarah? What happened? They rose early in the morning, went to the place, right? Isaac says, where's the sweet little cherub Sweet little, where's the offering? Abraham says, we'll see it when we get there. God will provide. They walked on together. Abraham takes the knife, reaches out to kill his son. Angel of the Lord says, stop. Hammer time. No, stop. Never mind. Here's a ram. Who saw the ram first? Was the ram there? What? Abraham names the place. Because you were willing to give me your son, I'll make your offspring as numerous as the stars, as plenteous as the sand. What was like family dinner like from then on? Did Isaac ever want to be alone with his dad ever again? You know, we never see them talking to each other again in the Bible. Period. They're never in the same scene. I don't think that's a coincidence. How did Isaac go on carrying this trauma? My father almost killed me and told me God told him to do it. How did Isaac build his own relationship with God, given this is what God does? Did Abraham dream this? Did God really? I have some questions. Children placed on the altar in God's name. And family systems holding this kind of trauma, and nobody talks about it. For I know Father Abraham had many sons have Father Abraham. I know. And I need to tell the truth about this history, this family system. If I was going to make a genogram, I need to build in some trauma. What did Sarah say when they got home? And Isaac wasn't the only son. Hello? Anyway. So reading in black means asking critical questions of the text, even reading against the text. That is faithful. I believe it. That is faithful. It is taking the text seriously enough to read what's actually there. And then figuring out a way we can be in community together given this. It's past 1 o'clock. I said I was going to let you go early. I'm sorry. Next week, the New Testament. We'll look at some stories. We'll read them in black. Thank you all so much for coming.